Welcome to Disc 2 for Animation Master 2005 training. This DVD will be all about rigging. And to start out, I'm just going to show you some simple, basic things about working with bones in Animation Master, how they work, what you can use them for. And so first I'm going to create a new model. And I'm just going to go up to Objects and double-click, create a new model here, and then I'm going to hit A. And then I'm going to draw out a spline, and then right-click. Now I'm going to grab one of those and lathe it so it's all together like that. Okay, now one thing I want to do is talk about bones. Here I just have my geometry. I'm in shaded mode here. I hit 0 on the numpad to go into shaded mode. I'm going to hit page down to tessellate my model down, and 6 to go back into the side view, and then I'm going to hit wireframe, which is 8 on the keyboard. Adding bones into Animation Master into an Animation Master model is very simple. You just go up here to the top menu and you click on Bones mode. You'll see everything turns black. If I click out here, you'll notice that a bone is highlighted and everything blinks. This bone right here is called the model bone. Every model has it. It usually starts at 0, 0, 0 and goes out in the Z from there. I never use that bone. But it's necessary, and it's also good for when you want to see point assignment, and I'll show you that in a minute. But everything is colored black because it means it's assigned to the model bone. As you can see, they're blinking. But I want to add some new bones in, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit A on the keyboard just like I would if I was adding a spline, and I'm going to click at the bottom and drag upwards and then let up on the mouse. Okay. Now what we have here is we have a bone. This is obviously the origin and the end. This is what's called the roll handle. And if I grab that, if I'm in an orthographic view, such as the side, I can just grab it and roll it and pull it as far as I can, and it will snap to that. And so now you can look at the rotation, and in the X, it is 90 degrees. Now if you look at where this bone is placed, it's right up and down the middle. If I go to my front view, you can see because I created this bone in the side view, it created it on 0 in the X. If I look at my start and end position over here in my properties, you'll see X is 0, X is 0, and it's only in the Y. Now in bone space, from tip to end, going this way is the Z direction of the bone. The roll handle points the Y direction, and then the X direction is perpendicular to that roll handle. So that is in bone space, like in object space versus world space. So that's how you create a bone. Now, if I want to create a second bone, all I have to do is, I just clicked off, but I'll click this. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can click on the bone, hit A again, and then click at the end of the bone and drag out another bone. What that does is it makes this bone an automatic child to this bone right here. If you notice over here, on your screen, bone 1 is now, or bone 2 is now a child to bone 1, and what that allows me to do is in Animation Master, each bone chain is by default an IK chain. So if I grab the end of this bone and rotate it, I'm just not doing anything. I'm not in an animation, but I'm just going to place it where I want. In an animation, I'll show you what that does. To do that, an animation in Animation Master is called an action. And I'm just going to double click that, and you'll see the model open in the front view. Hit 6 to go to the side view. Now as I click on a bone, you'll notice they're not colored anymore because I'm not assigning anything. This bone right here is a child to this bone, and it's also an automatic IK. So if I grab the end of this bone, hold down, and I drag, you'll notice that it automatically creates an IK chain. And that's what I was talking about before. Now going back to the model, all I have to do to assign points in the geometry to the bones now is just click the bone that I want to assign to, and then select the points. Click the bone, select the points. I'm actually going to select all of these. Actually, I'll do it to the red. And one of the beautiful things about Animation Master is I'm going to go up to tile horizontally here, and you can see the bones here and the action here. So if I go into my side view here and I bend this over, you can see how it affects the geometry now, but according to the bone assignment, this is still assigned to this bone. What if I want to change that? Well, I can just go back into my model, select those, and you can see it automatically changed in the animation. Just going to do that. Okay. These bones right here are what we call geometry bones. They are the bones that drive the mesh. There is a second type of bone called a cosmetic bone that I'm going to put in here in just a minute. And then there's a third type of bone called a control bone that actually drives the geometry bones. And that's what you do your animation on. So here, as I've put my bones in, you can see how the orientation is. They're both with their roll handles back, and they're both in IK. Now, if I say I don't want them to move like this, I just want this top bone to move. On my properties, if I click that bone, you'll notice in your properties here, you've got your start and end positions, your rotate, length of the bone. Under your transform, you can tell it how to translate, scale, rotate, all that. Attach to parent is on. If I turn it off, then it doesn't do it. But I still want them to be parents. So I'm going to go back to that, turn attach to parent on. Excuse me, I want it to be a child of the parent. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to lock the IK. And when I do that, you'll see this little X show up. And what that means is that the IK stops at this joint right here. So now in my animation, I can move that without moving the joint below it, or the bone below it, but I can grab the base of it and move it like that. Basically, you're talking about forward kinematics in this situation here. So bones are very, very simple to work with. Now, let's talk about some geometry or some cosmetic bones. I'm going to maximize this view here. Cosmetic bones assist the geometry bones in deformation. If you look back to this action, when I bend this over, you can see how this spline right here doesn't react very well. You get this nice pinching, the rubber hose situation going on. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a bone in between these two that will drive this spline. So what I do is I click on bone 1, hit A, click at the end of it again, and drag straight up. And I do it not all the way because I want to be able to see it and grab it. So I just make it smaller than bone 2, but that is called bone 3. And then while that is highlighted, I just grab those points. Now if I go into my action, you'll notice that this bone is just kind of sitting there, not doing anything. That is because I don't have any information for it. So what I can do is I can just manually grab the bone and move it over like that, and that way it adjusts for that bend. But I don't want to do it manually all the time. I want it to do automatically. So that then there's what's called constraints. And in an action, in an animation, you can set a constraint on something. It's also called a relationship, and we'll go through these later in the DVD. But just quickly, if I grab that bone, I right-click on it and say New Constraint, Orient Like, and an eyedropper tool comes up, and I put it over the bone I want it to orient like, and I click it. Now over my properties, I can tell it how much I want it to move like that bone. I want it to do it at 50%. So I type in 50. Now, when I grab this end bone and I move it, you'll notice the other one moves at 50%, no matter what I do. That way, you only have to move one bone, and that other bone will adjust to make it look right. Now, you'll notice here, now it's bending at a weird place because of the position of the bones that I have. So say I want to grab this bone, and I'm actually going to move it so that it pivots right off of that. Go back to my animation, and it's now fixed. So it looks a lot better now. So that's a very, very simple rundown of geometry and cosmetic bones. Let's go on to control bones. Now, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to have a bone that is not attached to any geometry but is driving these cosmetic and geometry bones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go into a different hierarchy. I'm just going to start without selecting anything, and I'm going to hit A, and I'm going to draw out a nice long bone like this. Okay. So now this bone is called my control bone, and what I'm going to do is all I need to do is it's not assigned to anything. But what I'm going to do is in my action, or in my animation, I'm going to tell this bone right here, new constraint, translate to this bone. Oops. Let's undo that. Okay, undid that. So right click on it, say new constraint, orient like this bone. Okay, so your big control bone, that one's going to orient like it. Okay, now this one right here, I'm going to right click it and say new constraint, aim at this bone. Okay, so now if I do this, I'm going to go back to my model here, and I'm actually going to hide these bones. I click the bone and hit J, or I can click the control points and you'll notice that they're highlighted here, and I can check on and off the eyeball. I'm going to check them all off so you can't see them at all. Go into my action. Now you notice that that's the only bone that I can see. Now as I move this bone, you can see that the bone underneath, let me hide or show these again. This bone is always aiming at this bone, at the origin of this bone, no matter where it is. But in addition to that, this bone here is always orienting like this bone. So then when I do this, it will orient like it. So I can do this, and then I can move it. And you can notice how that's all working together. So I have these three bones. I have this middle one too, this cosmetic bone, oops, that's orienting like this one at 50%, which is orienting like this one at 100%. So I can have one bone that's controlling all the geometry at one time without being assigned to any of the geometry. And I can adjust the roll and do all kinds of stuff with it. Now this is very, very nice for character rigging, and when we get into rigging the will model, I'll show you all about this. So you can see how much better the deformation is with that cosmetic bone in there, and what I can do with a control bone. I can just move this bone around, and because of the constraints, that fits, or that it follows everything that I do. And it looks good. So this is your control bone, and then these are your geometry bones, and this is your cosmetic bone. Bones in Animation Master are very, very nice to work with. They have a few limitations, but they're extremely nice to work with, and they're very, very forgiving because of the very non-linear way in which you can rig. You can rig a model, assign points, and in the middle of animation you can go change that, and your animation will just update. One other thing that I want to talk about is the manipulator options. If I go into this bone right here and say I don't want it to be able to roll with the roll handle, I can open up my manipulator options, turn them on, and expand them all out. And you can see here now I can turn on and off translate, on and off scale, and on and off rotate. Say I don't want to be able to scale it. I'm going to turn all those off, and I only want to rotate it along the X and the Z. So now that's that way. Now when I go to my animation, you'll notice that it comes up with these manipulators. Now there's an issue with most video cards with the clipping plane when the manipulator is up. So don't be freaked out if your model starts doing this. It's usually normal. If you click off of it, it works just fine, but when the manipulator is up, it kind of freaks out. But anyways, your manipulator comes up, and now you can see there's no green for the Y, for the roll. All I have is my X and my Z, and then I can translate it wherever I want to. But I can grab it, and you can see it only moves on that, or it just rolls. So I can limit the manipulation. I can limit the way that my bone deals with my geometry. I don't have to have every axis available. I can say on a finger I only want it to roll along the Y. Well, I can limit that. I can turn off the X and the Z. So it's really nice to work with the bones that way. So go back to my bone here, click on the bone. So I have my limit manipulators there, and you can just play around with those. Let me just show you the hierarchy here. I'm actually going to delete this action, so I'm going to grab it, close it, and I'm going to click it over here under actions and just hit delete. So here we are in the bones. I've got my geometry bone, my other geometry bone, my cosmetic bone that is a child of this, and then my control bone. Bones, like I said, in Animation Master are really, really good. They do a very good job of setting up rigging. Rigging is a breeze in Animation Master. It's not quite as powerful as some of the other packages, but it is so easy to rig a model. I could rig a model super fast in this, and trying to do things in Maya the same way would be almost near impossible without writing tons of Mel scripts and tons of math. So Animation Master is set up very well for rigging your character. So in the next tutorial we will start with the will model and start putting in geometry bones, and from there we'll put in cosmetic bones and control bones, and we'll pretty much be working on one side of the model and then flip it over to the other side. And then we'll go through all the constraints and the relationships and everything. So hope you have a good time rigging. Animation Master, like I said, is a really good program for rigging, and pretty simple.